I began my beekeeping adventure in France, in the heart of the Loire Valley in wine country, and what an adventure it turned out to be. Like so many others, I started with a swarm with a little Dadant nuke as part of a local farming agricultural initiative. And all was going beautifully. I had these lovely gentle bees. I was really enjoying everything. And then one day I heard a strange noise in the apiary. And I went to look, and there were these black insects. They were on steroids. There were 20 or 30 of them hovering around in front of the bees, snapping at the bees as they were coming and going. And I thought, what on earth is going on here? So I phoned my mentor, who was a wily old French countryman, you know, the berry and the baguette and all that sort of thing. And he said, "Ah, bah oui, monsieur, c'est la frelon asiatique." It's the Asian Hornet. And I'd never heard of it. So anyway, he turned up, and then we devised a plan as to how we were going to manage it. And manage it we did. So we had predation in the apiary, and we took steps to mitigate against it, and we got our bees through, and we had honey at the end of it. So what I'm going to do today is to tell you a little bit about how we did that. First of all, to put this into context, we're talking here about, as far as the UK is concerned, about a worst case scenario. There are some parts of England who won't see the Asian hornet at all. Some won't see it for quite a long time to come, but some of us on the south coast, and particularly in the southeast, have got it here already. We're not scaremongering, so we're not trying to frighten the life out of you and put you off beekeeping. Just the opposite. What we're trying to show is how we can live with the Asian hornet. And it's a question really of being prepared and practicing and putting in good beekeeping skills. And to be confident that you're in charge and you know what you're doing when it finally happens to you. And the bonus is, it certainly helped to make me a better beekeeper with happier bees and more honey and fewer losses. Asian hornets are probably here to stay. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of beekeeping. We can learn to live with them. But we need to raise our game. We need to think out of the box and get the basics right. I served for 20 odd years in the Royal Marines, and you think people in the commandos and special forces do all sorts of magical things. What they don't is they're dead good at the basics. They get the basics right every time. And that's what we need to do with our beekeeping. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, what is Fit2Fight? I'll describe the Asian Hornet life cycle, the principles behind the Fit2Fight system, the 3 pillars of Fit2Fight, adapting to the Asian Hornet life cycle, defense, counter-attack, and the timing of the actions that we have to take in the apiary with a traffic light system. And then at the end, there'll be time for questions and a little bit of discussion, I hope. So first of all, what is Fit2Fight? Well, it's good basic beekeeping adapted to the life cycle of the Asian Hornet, in which we take command of the situation. We are in charge, not the Asian Hornet. We are the boss, not them. We dictate what happens. This allows our colonies to function as normally as possible and to survive the period of predation. And that we can continue to love keeping bees, which we do. We're all here because we love keeping bees. And also to enjoy the fruits of their work and of our labours and our investment in time and money. With the Asian Hornet life cycle, this is the basis of most of what we do. You're probably familiar with this already. In the winter, the queens are hibernating. In the spring, sometime between the end of February and the end of May, the newly mated queens start to emerge. Now, they've got a pretty difficult time. They're cold, they're tired, they're hungry, they've got no food. They've got to find somewhere to live, build a little nest, they've got to find food for themselves, then they lay their eggs, they've got a little family to look after. She's a single parent mum, you know, single family mum, and all that goes with that. So she's extremely vulnerable at that time. Then as the first workers emerge, they take over the heavy lifting, and the queen then stays in the nest laying eggs. All through the late spring and the early summer, the colony expands until the middle of July, towards the middle or the end of July, it depends on the weather and where you are. The secondary nest is complete, the colony is pretty much at full strength, and that's when they go into the predation period, and that's the danger period for our bees and all the other insects on which they feast. So that's when we've got to be at maximum vigilance. Then later in the summer and the early autumn, they enter the reproduction period. The young males are born, young queens are born, they mate, and then in the autumn the colony dies out and those young queens fly off into hibernation. So that's the circle complete. The underlying principle of Fit2Fight is that any organism that's under threat has a better chance of survival if it's healthy, strong in numbers, and well fed. That applies to any organism. So in Fit2Fight, the three pillars then are number 1, healthy bees, number 2, strong colonies, and number 3, well-fed stock. So let's start with pillar number 1, healthy bees. How do we assure that? Well, we carry out rigorous health inspections 3 times during the season, in the spring, in midsummer, and in the autumn. Strict apiary hygiene, and that can be a talk in its own right, but it's very important that we really are strict about our apiary hygiene. Regular comb change. We normally change our combs every 3 years or so. With Fit2Fight, we change them more often. We don't want all those nasty pathogens that lurk in dirty comb to infect our bees. And most of all, we maintain a low varroa load. Varroa is our worst enemy and one of the Asian hornet's best friends. With regular health inspections, it's a visit in its own right. You don't do anything else, you're concentrated just on looking at your bees and the brood. Observe the hive entrance, look out for anything unusual, any odd behaviour. Bees fighting at the entrance, staining on the outside, dead bees outside, bees crawling on the ground or at the stems of grass. Open the hive and watch the adult bees, see how they're behaving on the frames. Are they walking normally? Do they look chipper and healthy with nice wings, or are they crawling about, not looking very happy? And then when you open the hive, be ready to recognise, know what to look for, recognise healthy brood, like this lovely frame of capped brood there. Isn't that a dream to see all your frames like that? But also to know what to look for when something's wrong. So it might just be 1 or 2 of those cells in there have got something dodgy about them. Learn to spot that and recognise it for what it is. With the adult bees, we're looking for signs of nosema, which could be dysentery, diarrhea on the outside or on the frames, but not always. And often it's only diagnosable by microscopic examination. But you can do a simple apiary test with a bee by pulling out its intestine with some tweezers and seeing if the normally yellowy brown intestine has got white blobs in it. Then you know that there's something wrong. Deformed wing virus, which, with the wings shredded looking like that, which comes with a high varroa load, and chronic bee paralysis virus, the two types of that, with the one with the shrunken bees and poor wings and not able to fly, crawling about, or the one with shiny black bodies, which are being refused entrance by the guard bees, black rubber disease. With the brood, of course, we're looking out for the notifiable diseases: American foul brood, European foul brood, and chalk brood, which we often see in the spring when we haven't got many bees in our colonies, and sac brood with the gondola-shaped larvae like that. So learn to recognise these things and take action immediately to remedy it. Of course, with the notifiable diseases, we've got to put our hives into lockdown immediately. With varroa, so we do regular testing and monitoring with our methods of integrated pest management, so drone brood uncapping and drone brood removal, comb trapping, miticides. I use, with Asian Hornets, I use Formic Pro. It's a 1 application treatment. So you're only opening the hive once to put it on and once again to take it off, and it's over and done with. If you've got strong colonies with young queens, it's never a problem. And oxalic acid when they're broodless. And shook swarm. Shook swarm is terrific in the spring. If you've got strong colonies, shook swarm them, get them onto nice clean comb, give them an oxalic acid treatment, and they're away. And if you collect or given a swarm, into quarantine until you're sure it's healthy, and a treatment at the same time. And that's the last thing we want to see in our colonies. It's a pitiful sight of varrosis, parasitic mite syndrome. Strong colonies. Building strong colonies starts the previous autumn. We'll come on to that in a minute, but we start the previous autumn into doing our treatments, feeding them so that the queen lays lots of eggs to produce lots of winter bees. Then we build up our colonies in the spring and that comes with its own dangers. So you can end up with more brood than you have bees to look after them, or you can get into swarming fairly quickly. So rigorous swarm prevention. And we want to achieve a maximum foraging force before the predation period starts. So we're getting all our honey in before the Asian hornets come a-calling. And then building strong colonies going into winter. So the autumn preparation for spring building, the varroa treatment, introduce new young queens. This is the time to put your new young queens in, which are going to be laying like mad the following year. Check for nosema, because nosema, even though it might not be very evident in the summer, big strong colonies, they look good. Nosema, if it's there, will reproduce and reproduce relentlessly in the winter, and then in the spring you've got a problem. So liquid feed and pollen supplement to get the queen laying, particularly. The eggs that she lays in July and August, those bees will all die. It's the eggs she lays in September that emerge in October are the winter bees. And then a strong population of winter bees with well-stocked fat bodies because they've had lots of food. Spring preparation, stimulative feeding for the queen to lay, health inspection right at the beginning to make sure that they're all okay, and then varroa monitoring, as you would normally do. Unite healthy colonies, or build colonies with frames of sealed brood from others, but of course they've got to be healthy and varroa-free when you do that. Transfer sealed brood, as I said, and give them room. So you're starting your swarm prevention early. And don't forget, the first super needs to be a drawn comb. If it's foundation, they don't see that as space. They don't want to draw it out. So drawn comb for the first super of the season. So understand the swarming impulse. Really get your head around how swarming works. The countdown to swarming. You'll see a whole series of events which occur before they swarm. But once they get to this point of D-minus 28 to 14, then it's too late. You've missed the chance. So then you're into swarm control. All of these things are on the internet, so you can download them fairly easily, and it'll be available on this talk at the end, from this talk at the end. So recognize the signs, watch them like a hawk, don't be caught napping, and take preemptive action by giving them space quickly. Swarm control, if you miss a trick, know and practice your chosen methods. Have all the kit ready on site. Don't wait until it happens to go scrabbling around, oh, where's this, where's that queen excluder, where's that brood box. Have the kit ready, have it there, on site, ready to go. And the nuke method keeps the foraging force together. It's simple, it's quick, it's easy to do, and you keep your foraging force together. They might not do much foraging, but you've still got them there together at the end of that period. Queens, we need young, productive queens, and that might mean changing the queens more often than we have done before. There's one with this year's dot on. And we've been used to selecting our queens for calm behaviour, for good temperament, but we might have to rethink that a little bit. So we're looking really for hygienic behaviour and disease resistance. We don't want to lose our colonies from disease. Colonies which have the trait of strong, queens which have the trait of strong spring build-up. Some don't build up until later in the year, but others get going really early in the spring, and these are the ones that you want. And with low swarming characteristics, because you don't want them to swarm. And I change my queens every year now. I've been practicing Fit2Fight for 2 or 3 years in England. I wanted to put it to the test, so I've been practicing it in my home apiary, and I'm changing my queens every year. But the queen rearing in Fit2Fight, we start in the spring. We can get it going early by giving drone foundation to the colonies to get the queen to lay drones to begin with. Then as soon as you've got your drone foundation, your drones flying, then you can start queen rearing. And we need to get our queens mated and in nukes or colonies by the end of June or the beginning of July, before the predation period starts. Once the predation period starts, the queens aren't going to go on mating flights. If they do, they'll get yaffled. So we need to make sure that everything's done and dusted by the end of June or the beginning of July. So pillar 3, well-fed stock. We're feeding syrup and pollen and water. And in spring we're feeding to avoid starvation, as usual, and to stimulate the queen to lay. To build up colonies for the spring flow. In summer to replace foraging during predation. During predation, the bees go into what's called foraging paralysis. So they'll cluster in a defensive line or wall in front of the front of the hive, at the hive entrance, and they don't forage. So we've got to replace that. Otherwise the queen stops laying and the colony will dwindle and die. So we need to keep the queen laying normally, and then in autumn stimulate the queen to produce winter bees. Again, this is feeding with thin syrup in the middle of September so that the queen is laying lots of eggs to produce the winter bees, and then to build up stores for the winter. Syrup or fondant. It's good to know why we're feeding these things. Why do they need it? Why do they need sugar? Of course, it's a source of carbohydrates. It stimulates the queen to lay eggs. It gives them energy for work inside and outside of the colony, for the production of brood food, for making wax, for keeping warm in the winter, and to stock up the winter bees' fat bodies, so that they can feed the larvae in the spring. Sugar syrup dilution. There are different schools of thought on this, but thin syrup is what used to be called 1-to-1 in the old money. Is for immediate use. They will take that down and use it straight away for stimulative feeding and in spring build-up and during active Asian hornet predation. So he's simulating the income of nectar from the flowers. And then for the autumn winter bees. Intermediate or rescue feeding, as Wally Shaw calls it, is 1 kilo of sugar to 1 litre of water. And we can use that in the spring. If you've got struggling colonies, give them that as rescue feeding in the spring, and to help them draw comb. And then thick syrup in the autumn for use as winter stores. If you give them thick syrup, it used to be called 2-to-1, they'll just take it down as stores. And then fondant in winter as normal. You can lay it on the brood frames like that with a shallow eek or in an upside down takeaway box. So pollen, we're looking at pollen as well. So they need protein for the development of the worker glands. The young bees, when they first emerge, for the first 3 days, they need to eat lots of pollen and lots of honey, lots of nectar to build up their hypopharyngeal and mandibular glands so that they can then start producing the brood food for the larvae, production of brood food. For making wax, if they've got pollen coming in, they can make the wax. Without the pollen, they can't make the wax. Stimulating the queen to lay and to build up the winter fat bodies and feeding the larvae in the spring. So we feed pollen in the early spring to stimulate the queen to lay, late spring to stimulate her to continue to build up the foraging force, in the summer when there's no foraging, and mid-autumn for the production of winter bees. So pollen supplement, you can make it up into pollen patties like that, or you can buy a commercially produced product which is much easier, candy pollen. There's been some recent research in the University of Miami, and I'm going to read this to you because it's changed my thinking on pollen feeding. So a proportion of adult worker bees ingest pollen substitute patties, however they do not feed it directly to the larvae, store it as bee bread or reject it as debris. So while adult worker bees do ingest the pollen substitute patties, the patties do not completely replace natural pollen in terms of function. So for me, it's a waste of time. I want them to be able to do all of those things, so I don't use pollen substitute anymore. And I make my own pollen patties. And water, we can forget that we need to feed them water sometimes if they can't forage. It's for their internal metabolism, for temperature regulation. They scatter droplets of water on the tops of the frames and fan it with their wings to cool by evaporation. For diluting stored honey is very concentrated, so they need to dilute it before they can eat it. Producing brood food. And the time to give them is during crop spraying, which you'll know about that because you'll be on Beeconnect. During hot weather or drought, if they can't forage, well, normally they will beard on the outside of the hive like that. But if there are Asian hornets around, no chance of that because they'll get picked off by the hornets. So we've got to feed them. So a simple contact feeder on the hole in the crown board will suffice for that. Adapting our beekeeping to the life cycle of the Asian hornet. We do that according to the level of risk. The point is, we may not have to do it. We may be lucky and escape it altogether. Even in an area where there are Asian hornets, there's a chance that they won't come to your apiary. That's happened. It happened to me one year in France. They didn't come at all. The next year they were there with a vengeance. So it all depends. So you do it according to the perceived level of risk. And you can evaluate that by looking at a traffic light system, for example. So green in an area where no Asian hornets have been seen yet, amber where they're confirmed in my area, and red when the hornets are actually hunting in or near the apiary. So you've got different actions to take. So there we are again with the life cycle. And this is it in a linear format. So the top of the line is what the Asian hornets are doing. In the spring with their primary nest, the workers coming out, secondary nest, predation period here, the mating, guidance to hibernation, death of the colony, and these are all the things that we do in the corresponding time. So feeding, uniting, health inspections, swarm prevention, starting the queen rearing, health inspections again in the summer, take off the honey, put on the varroa load, and then put them into lockdown until the end of predation, and then we open up varroa and feed. So in a nutshell, we're going for an early spring build-up, maximum foraging force May, June, and into July. By the time predation starts, honey off, varroa treatment done, lockdown during predation, and then any manipulations that are done, we do at dawn and dusk, because the hornets don't fly at night. So we've got that breathing space from dusk until dawn. Defence. What can we do to defend? Well, we've got various options, but the aims of all of them really are to reduce the level of predation, reduce the stress of predation, and hopefully help the colony to function as normally as possible. The defensive measures, we can grow grass around the hives. That stops the hornets getting underneath and round the back, reducing the stress. We can group the hives together. This is a bit surprising because normally we don't do that. We don't want drifting and robbing and that sort of thing. But with the Asian hornet, strangely, it's been discovered in France that when hives are grouped together, the hornets are less likely to attack them. Maybe it's strength in numbers. The bees are more confident. Maybe it's strength in numbers. We don't really know, but it works. So if you're a single hive beekeeper, if the Asian hornet comes, think about moving it to your association apiary or to a bee buddy who's got more hives. So they're not isolated on their own. That was my first experience. It was one single hive, and boy, did they go for it. So put in the varroa board, but be careful with ventilation in the summer, of course. Entrance reducers, so we reduce the entrance, prepare to reduce the entrance right down. I put a tangle of branches. I didn't know about muzzles and harps. So what we did, we made a tangle of hawthorn and blackthorn branches, wove them into a ball, put them in front of the hive, pinned them down with a couple of bits of bamboo so they didn't blow away, and that kept the hornets away from the front of the hive. The hornets didn't try and fly through it, but the bees had more dispersal room and somewhere to hide. That cost nothing, and it worked really well. But then along come the muzzles, which work to a similar sort of principle, and the harp, which has proved to be very effective in Spain and France. There's some very clever, simple but quite clever entrance adjusters, which I found. This one has got a slider, so you can adjust it quite conveniently. And this one from New Zealand called Hivegate, where there's a flat tube which gives out to the brood nest, so they've got all that area to defend. But we hope the Asian hornets don't get as far as the entrance, but this works very well against wasps as well. The muzzle, these are now available in the UK market. This one is by Thorns, and another similar one called the Stop It, which is a plastic structure with the same principle. But you will have seen all of this in lectures by Andrew Durham and others, so I won't labour that point. The same with the harp. That can be powered either by mains or by battery or by a solar device. So what can we do that's active as opposed to passive defence? What can we do that's active? Well, monitoring. We should be monitoring all the time, certainly from February till November, in a convenient place, so outside of your kitchen window, the office window, somewhere where you can see it easily, watch what's going on, change the bait if necessary, release any bycatch which you have, and then report it if you see an Asian hornet. But not in the apiary, because it'll only attract the hornets to the apiary. So we're looking for the presence of all castes, queens, workers, males in the autumn, and with bait stations, preferably with bait stations, or if not, selective traps, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Bait stations, easy to make. That's a coffee jar, I think. All you do is a jar with a hole in the lid, put your bait inside, J-cloth sticking out the top, and the insects are attracted to it. But there you've got some European hornets, a bee, I think, and a nice little butterfly. But they're all feeding away quite safely. They're not in danger. And the Asian hornet would be the same. It would share that feeding with the European hornets. They might squabble a bit, but then you get out your Asian Hornet watch app and zap it, and you know where it is. So there's zero bycatch from this. A bait station, this is one in Bob Hogg's garden, a famous Bob Hogg in Jersey. There they are, the Asian hornets, feeding on the bait stations, and they're flying back to their nest. They can be tracked back to their nest. Trapping. Trapping is quite controversial. It can be misunderstood and it's often misguided. It needs to be appropriate, it needs to be proportionate, and it needs to be timely. And it's not a magic silver bullet. Trapping is not the answer to the Asian hornet problem. It's just one weapon in our armoury of measures. Spring queen trapping, there's a lot of talk about spring queen trapping, and it's been used successfully on the island of Guernsey and in Jersey. We do that in places where there were nests the previous late autumn. Remember from the life cycle, in the autumn the gynns go into hibernation. They're the ones that are coming out in the spring that you want to catch. If there weren't any nests there won't be any gynns in the spring, so it's a waste of time. Or it can be around an apiary. If there's an apiary that was subject to heavy predation the previous year, might not have found the nest, but you know that there will be one near there. So we do that from February, the end of February, until the end of May. That's the time when the new queens are emerging, to catch emerging foundress queens before they can start their new families, with selective traps. We need to set up a grid system for spring queen trapping. So you've got the apiary in the middle, and then in a circle at about 500 metres from the apiary or from the nest, you put your traps. You can see this takes access to the ground, access to the area. So in the south of England, where it's very densely populated, it's quite difficult. You need to have human resources. You need financial resources, because it all costs money. The traps are expensive, the bait is expensive. You need personnel to observe them, to change the bait, to report on them. So it's quite a big logistic exercise to do. In the apiary, we can put out what I call decoy traps during the active period of predation only. So you don't put them there when there's no predation, because that's only likely to attract the hornets to you, and you don't want to do that. In the apiary itself, to reduce the stress on the bees, we won't reduce the number of nests. No matter how many hundreds of Asian hornets you catch in your traps, it won't affect the number of nests. We only affect the number of nests by finding and destroying them. And again with selective traps. And the sort of layout you would have would be a small apiary with one trap on the end, a medium-sized apiary with a trap at either end, and a larger apiary with two, one at each end and one in the middle. And the traps should be 1.5 to 2 metres from the nearest hive, so the bees aren't stressed by the noise and the pheromones from the Asian hornets in the traps. For trap design, the top priority is to avoid that. This is what you need to avoid at all costs. Look at the cost in bycatch of catching just 3 Asian hornets. So if we put out non-selective traps, we're clearing the area of insects before the Asian hornet even arrives. And remember, the traps are operating 24 hours a day. They're catching moths and things at night. Insects on the wing at night are likely to go in your traps. There are no Asian hornets there. So it's just multiplying the damage that you're doing to the environment. No trap is 100% guaranteed to be bycatch free. And it's very stressful for the victims anyway. Even if you find them and release them, they've still been through a very stressful experience, and often they don't survive for very long afterwards, and sometimes aren't capable of reproduction. Some popular designs. This has been very successful this year, the Guard Apis one. It's got different size entrance nozzles for the spring, for spring queens, and for the rest of the year for smaller insects, for smaller hornets. And the Jade probe from France, this is partly a DIY. You've got two inverted cones in a box, and that's quite good for reducing bycatch too. What is a no-no is homemade bottle traps like this one here. There were 3 dead European hornets in there, complete waste of precious, valuable insects. And the Vita Farmer one, well look, you know, it's just full of dead insects. There might be Asian hornets there, but they were all drowned in the bait, like that. So what we do, we avoid drowning by putting a sponge or a rag in the bottom, soak it with the bait, so that the insects go in there are caught, but they don't drown. Dimensions. If we're making traps, the entry dimension needs to be 8 millimetres for queens and 7 millimetres for workers during the rest of the season. And then escape, not holes, but slots are easier for them to get out of, a minimum of 6.5 millimetres. As far as bait is concerned, trap it or its equivalent has proved very effective. We don't bother putting prawns and things and cat meat in there. It goes off and smells horrible, and it's no more effective. So trap it or equivalent is quite good. In France, we use a mixture of 1/3 syrup. Syrup is concentrated fruit juice that you make a squash type of drink out of it. 1/3 of beer and 1/3 of dry white wine. Anything Australian will do. You don't waste good French wine on this. Or Asian hornets. Asian hornets themselves are excellent bait. The noise they make and the pheromones attract other hornets to them, even when they're dead. So once you've got an Asian hornet or 2 in your trap, you don't need to buy any more bait. And always in pots with a sponge to avoid drowning. As far as the timing and the level of response is concerned, it's according to the level of the threat. So remember the traffic light system: proportionate, appropriate, and timely. And it's at the discretion of the beekeeper. You're in charge, you're in command, you decide what to do when. So when it's green, so we can grow the grass around the hives, avoid attracting attention, don't go to the apiary unless you really have to. Open the hives the minimum times possible, but ideally in the evening or in the early morning, so all those lovely smells of bees and honey and wax and things don't go up and attract the Asian hornets to them. Group the hives together, we've already discussed that, and carry out monitoring. Monitor all the time. Amber, we insert our varroa boards, but again be careful with ventilation, especially if you've got Formic Pro or whatever treatment you have on. Prepare to deploy your entrance defences and traps. Move single hives. Remove the honey harvest. If you know that the Asian hornets are coming soon, take the honey harvest off whilst you still can. Get your varroa treatment done and continue to monitor. And then when they finally arrive, first of all, don't panic. You're well prepared, you know what to do. You're up to speed with all this, you're all tooled up, ready to rock. Report first of all on the Asian Hornet Watch app, which you all have installed on your phones, don't you? Yes, Ellen. Reduce the entrances to a minimum. So in fact, you're putting them into a form of lockdown. Put your decoy traps out and prepare to start feeding syrup, pollen and water, as we've already discussed. And provide shade in hot weather if you can. So overheating is going to be a problem. Remember, it's late July, August, hottest time of the year. Fit your muzzles and install harps if you have them. And then we open the entrances at night. As soon as the Asian hornets have stopped flying, we get in there, open the hive entrances, let them breathe, let some cool night air go in until we go back the next morning. If the Asian hornets are there, then lock them down again. So Asian hornets are here to stay. It's not the end of the world. We can learn to live with them, and we will, I'm sure. We're all determined. We're determined people. We're not going to give in to this. I've done it. I did it in France. We hear lots of horror stories from France and other places about beekeepers losing their hives. For every beekeeper that loses, there's no scientific basis for this, but I would say for every beekeeper in France who's lost colonies, there are another 10 who've carried on normally, well, not quite normally, but in the way I've described, and continue to keep bees and continue to produce honey. And we just need to have a positive attitude towards this. Get the basics right. Just become really good at basic. This has made me a much, much better beekeeper. Adapt to the life cycle of the Asian Hornet. Take command. Take charge in the apiaries. Healthy bees, strong colonies, well-fed stock. We can do it. I have the best honey harvest I've ever had practicing Fit2Fight in my English apiaries. So that's a bonus. You know, that's a real bonus. Better beekeeper, more honey. And no losses. I haven't lost any colonies at all. In the spring, over winter, in the spring, for the last 3-4 years, I haven't lost any colonies whatsoever by practicing Fit2Fight. So the bonuses. Get the bees fit to fight.
I just had a question about underfloor entrances. Is there any evidence that the underfloor entrances are very good at deterring wasps, whether they are any use against Asian hornets?
I have no experience of using underfloor entrances, but logically you would think that the effect is the same. What we don't want to do, we don't want to let the Asian hornets get near the entrances. That's why we put out our defences. And in fact, practice has shown that they don't try to get into the hives until the hive is so weakened that the guard bees don't put up a fight. The guard bees are still there, they're all there, and the Asian hornets don't want to engage with the guard bees. So as long as the colony's there and it's functioning and the guard bees are there and you've got your defences, they won't even try to get in. But when they do, if they do get to that point of being in the entrances, you've lost the game anyway. So that's my response to that. I don't really know, but I would guess that it's just as effective for hornets as it is for wasps. But you don't want to get to that stage.
The New Zealand entrance that you showed, the blue plastic one, that's effectively an underfloor entrance.
Yes.
Yes, so it's effectively the same thing.
It is, yeah.
I'm just interested about your queens. You said you change your queen every year. Does that mean that you change, if you had a 2024 queen, you change that at the end of 2025?
It depends how she's performing.
But just for the purposes of the Asian Hornet?
Well, I said change queens every year if necessary.
Okay.
So the queens that I've introduced this autumn, I put five new queens that I bred this autumn, they will lay all of next year, and I'll be evaluating them throughout the year. The ones that lay well and continue to lay well into autumn, I will leave for 1 more year. The others that I've got any doubt at all about, I replace them. But I try to produce lots and lots of queens, so I've got plenty of options. And I'm going into the winter with nukes of new queens. So I've got replacements in case any of them fail over the winter. So every year, every other year. But I'm prepared to change them every year if necessary. You have to be quite ruthless about this. People don't like killing queens. I have absolutely no hesitation at all about culling queens. If they're not performing up to scratch, they're out. If they're good but getting a bit tired, I might put them in a nuke and breed from them the following year, so I'm not squidging them straight away. If they're really good characteristics particularly, I'll use them again another year, but they won't be my main queens.
If you were in the Marines, you used to killing people, so you weren't too worried about killing bees.
Well, that's what I say. In the Royal Marines, you travel the world, you meet interesting people and kill them. You know.
You said you've moved away from pollen substitute. Can you say a bit more about what you're using instead?
Well, I use candy pollen. I buy it, you know. It's a lot of faff. But I have made pollen supplement, and that's it's not simple, it's a bit of a fag, but you use about 60% of fat-free soya flour, 20% brewer's yeast, 20% pollen. Mix it all up with a bit of water, make it into a patty on a bit of greaseproof paper, slap it on top of the frames upside down. But candy pollen, it does everything that the pollen supplements do.
So where I live, I have always had an enormous wasp problem, and I mean enormous wasp problem. And I follow most of those protocols to deal with the wasps. And I certainly have found I grow blackthorn up in front of and around most of my hives.
Yep.
Have been criticised for that. However, it absolutely works because the bees know where they're going and it totally confuses the wasps, and that's really amazing. I can recommend people do that. The only other thing I was going to ask is, you say about close proximity of hives, gather them together. How close would you put the hives?
Really, really close together.
How close?
Almost touching each other.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It depends how much space you've got, but yeah, you want to keep it all concentrated. You've got a smaller area to defend then.
Okay. At the moment, I've got an apiary, and most of my hives are, I suppose they must be 1 metre, 4 foot apart. So closer than that.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Because the Asian Hornets will pick them off one by one. But if they're all together, they seem not to want to do that quite so much.
So do you leave them all together the whole year, or just during predation time?
I would put them together if it looks if we're going to have a waspy year, and the Asian Hornets are likely to be coming. Then I'd move them together progressively in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
It depends. There's no hard and fast rule about it. And I've just left them there now. It's too much fag to keep moving them backwards and forwards, so I just leave them there now.
So you leave them there the whole year?
Yeah, yeah. And I don't worry too much about drifting. With drifting, it swings and roundabouts. You know, there are no other apiaries very close to me, so I'm not worried about bees drifting from other apiaries. And I know that my bees are really healthy, so if they drift in and out, which they do it all the time, I'm sure, I don't worry too much about it. And in the spring, if you're going for spring build-up, then it's not a bad thing to build your population by letting other bees drift in there. The same as when you go to the heather, you know, you boost your foraging population by encouraging drifting.
On the point of closeness of hives, it'd be interesting to see how the alpine beekeepers with their bee houses, how they manage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they really are close.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they've only got a very small space to operate.
Yeah, that's
anyway.
right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When did you first encounter the hornet in France, Alan? And how long were you in France, please?
Well, I was in France for 23 years, so a bit. I first saw them, I think it was in 2017. They were there already, but I wasn't really aware of it. I wasn't beekeeping before then, so that's when I started beekeeping. And I just joined a local agricultural cooperative in my village. And Monsieur Blatier, the famous Monsieur Blatier, put a hive in my garden. I had a big walled garden at the back, so he put a hive in there. And he didn't mention anything about Asian hornets. I hadn't heard about them. They obviously weren't there in huge numbers in our area. You know, I was in the country. I was very close to the earth. I was close to the natural world, so I wasn't aware of them until then. And then suddenly one day, bing, they were there. You know, so I had them for 17, 18, 19, and the beginning of 2020, and that's when I moved to England when I got married again and came here. So 3 years. So 1 year we didn't have very much at all. First year was chaotic. I mean, they were they were mad. They're just all over it. But by then we developed a system of management, and we didn't lose any. That's the main thing. Losses, 0. And many other beekeepers in France are saying no losses at all. That's the message of hope. We can do it.
Can I remind everybody that at the moment we are still in the eradication phase. Everything Alan's been talking about is if we lose that battle effectively, and for the big advantage we have in the UK over the French is that this is not a surprise to us.
Absolutely.
We've had years and years of warning and little dribs and drabs in, and we've managed to keep them at bay for the last 10 odd years, and if we keep working at the monitoring and we keep cooperating, we may well be able to keep them at bay for the next 10 years. So that I would suggest is an equally important message to what we should do if we fail effectively.
Absolutely. That's the whole purpose of my talk today, is that we are prepared for if it happens. I think it will, certainly in the southeast of England and along the south coast. I think almost certainly they will become established. I agree 100% with what Martin said, but the purpose really is that we are prepared. We are psychologically, physically and intellectually prepared for when it happens, and hopefully become better beekeepers because of it. It's basic beekeeping at a higher degree of intensity. You've got to be really close to your bees. You've got to be with them every day. Now that's quite a big call for a lot of people, especially busy people who are working. You've got to be there on top of the situation all the time. So enhanced husbandry, if you like.
This leads on to a concern that I have, which I spoke to Alan briefly about. If the Asian Hornet is confined to the southeast and everybody keeps hearing talks like this, further up the country they might think, oh, it hasn't got here, it's not going to get here, and take the foot off the pedal. And I think we've all still got to be very, very much alert.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with climate change, if you've seen Andrew Durham's presentation, you've seen how climate change and the Asian Hornet go hand in hand. And climate change is happening all the time. And it's one of the three big challenges that we've got in beekeeping today. One is changing demographics among beekeepers, older beekeepers ending their beekeeping career, not enough younger beekeepers coming in to replace them. Climate change that's really happening big time. Financial pressures, economic pressures, the Asian Hornet. All of those things are militating against us. And those of us who remain I'm sure will be much better, more skilled beekeepers as a result of it.
It happened with Varroa.
As with Varroa?
Yeah,
absolutely.
It happened with Varroa.
Yeah.
All the poorer beekeepers just fell by the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that might happen with Asian Hornet.
Well,
but you won't, will you? None of you.